I was muted there. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off because we have two special guests today and a lot to cover. So yeah, first, before I get to the normal tip sheet, our two special guests are Michelle Mondo and Philip Isle. Do you guys want to just introduce yourself real quick? Michelle, you can go first.
Hi, my name is Michelle Mundo. I'm a former reporter for the San Antonio Express News here in San Antonio, Texas. I am now a licensed private investigator in Texas, and I do criminal defense, OSINT work, and some other stuff. And I am working on a book right now.
And Michelle has an awesome presentation on finding local court records, so you guys are in for a treat.
Thank you.
Phil, who are you?
Hey there. My name is Phil Isle. I'm a freelance journalist based in my hometown of Providence, Rhode Island, written for all kinds of publications near and far. Last April, about exactly a year ago, I published my debut book, Prescription for Pain: How a Once Promising Doctor Became the Pill Mill Killer. It's a true crime story about a guy who went to medical school with my dad, who's serving life in prison for prescription drug dealing. And behind the story was a massive FOIA battle, multi-year battle for unreleased evidence from Volkman's criminal trial, which shouldn't have ever been a FOIA case in the first place, but it was. And I got the ACLU involved and wound up getting thousands of pages of documents through that lawsuit. And in the process, I got interested in the broader subject of nonfiction books that are based in part on FOIA documents. And so back in Sunshine Week, I wrote a piece for Muck Rock called the FOIA Authors Club, in which I share some of my favorite FOIA fueled titles and pluck out some juicy quotes that authors have said or written about FOIA over the years. And I'm delighted to talk to you all about that article.
Awesome. And I just dropped a link to our notes for today, which has a link to that article. And I'm going to share my screen and run through that agenda. So, yeah, first for updates, I have some requests I filed here this week, as a lot of people were. I was watching ICE detain students they say were proponents of Hamas or terrorist organizations. And I had a lot of questions. So I filed several different FOIAs to ICE. The first here is for emails between the State Department and ICE, or ICE leadership, discussing what Marco Rubio called yesterday a plan that is now in full force for revoking student visas. I believe he said they have revoked around 300 so far. Um, I followed that with a few other requests, one for ICE air operations. So technically, the transportation they use to transfer people who are detained is through something called ICE air operations. And that got me interested in tracking the way that people are being transferred right now. It seems like a lot of recent news has been about people transferred to Louisiana. So I filed that. And then lastly, more requests for transfer documents and detention files. Um, I am no expert on ICE though, so if anyone on this call knows more about the types of documents that ICE produces when it detains people, I would love some feedback or ideas for other requests. Um, and then, yeah, last week was Sunshine Week. So I just wanted to say a big thank you again to the Breckner Center for Freedom of Information for an awesome Sunshine Fest. I was there in DC last week, and along with a lot of great civic groups, journalists, government employees, or previous government employees, got to talk about where the world of sunshine and freedom of information is right now, what the next few years look like. And yeah, it was both disheartening and heartening at the same time. I left with, I think, a better idea from some of the conversations about how this administration's policies will affect the administrative capacity of FOIA officers, at least at the federal level. And I also learned a lot about a couple states that are doing some pretty cool things. I think this is highlighted in the recap from the Breckner Center. including Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, who all have interesting models for enforcement that don't exist at the federal level and are unique in their own ways. So yeah, a lot of cool things that I learned. Great time spent there. We also at Muck Rock published several different articles for Sunshine Week. I wrote up 5 things I learned from a year of FOIA Fridays. So if you're interested in what I've learned from you all in the last year, you can check that out. We published the Foilies, which is the worst in transparency. There's a lot of good stuff there. My favorite being the Foilies entry for the NSA and their confusion about a file type that a lecture of Grace Hopper was on. Um, we also published a bit about a uh, Brazilian journalism outlet called Fiquem Sabendo that was doing some analysis in Document Cloud to uncover what Bolsonaro spent money on through his receipts. We had a FOIA 101 if you need a refresher. We published an article that Phil just mentioned called the FOIA Authors Club. Um, and yeah, so it was a busy Sunshine Week. On the horizon, we have Document Cloud's monthly office hours coming up. And for next FOIA Friday, I'm thinking about the question of how text messages and instant messages through clients like Slack or Outlook are handled differently than emails and requests. So if you have thoughts or ideas on that, definitely drop me a line. And yeah, with that, I will pass it to Phil to tell us a little bit more about his first FOIA request, which I think was for prescription for pain.
It was, yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me. It's a longtime fan of Muck Rock, and it's an honor to be here with you all among my fellow FOIA enthusiasts. Um, yeah, as a part of this book project, which although it came out last year, I first started reporting on it in some form in 2009 and was working on the story on and off for more than a decade. And in that time, Paul Volckmann faced criminal trial. Unlike the majority of federal defendants, he refused to take a plea deal. And so his case went to a rather lengthy trial in federal court in Cincinnati in 2011. The trial lasted about 8 weeks. There were 70 prosecution witnesses, 10 from the defense, and hundreds of exhibits presented by the prosecutors to convince the jury, ultimately successfully, that this guy was in fact a drug dealer and not a doctor. So I'm writing about this case. I have plans for a book. I think shouldn't be too hard to get this trial evidence shown in open court, sent a man to prison. We have public trials in this country, right? Well, not so fast. We could spend a whole other conversation talking about the transcript and the costs of that, but I eventually got my hands on the transcript of the trial, which was over 4,000 pages. Um, and not necessarily cheap because I had to download that all from Pacer um, and order some segments myself. But the exhibits, thousands of pages of medical records, of photographs of Volkmann's sketchy pain clinics, of videos taken by the DEA agents during raids, of prescription slips, of um, subpoenas from local coroners when patients died. Uh, I had a much harder time getting that stuff. Was told no by everyone I asked for access at the court level. I spoke to multiple clerks. I spoke to the prosecutor. I even asked the judge. And ultimately, people said, go file a FOIA request. So, as I say in this essay that I wrote for Muckrock, I don't necessarily think I should have needed to FOIA for trial evidence, but I did. And it was the first FOIA I ever filed, February 1st, 2012. I mailed it off, a date that will forever live in personal infamy for me because it became the starting point for years and years of stuff. Basically, delays, aggressive redactions, the whole kind of signature FOIA runaround for a few years, and ultimately, with very little to show for it, I contacted my local ACLU, and we did what is unfortunately so often necessary to get this stuff. We sued. We sued the Drug Enforcement Administration in my home district court in Providence, and ultimately won. By coincidence, small world, Rhode Island's even smaller. The judge in my FOIA case was the same judge, John McConnell, who just ruled on the funding freeze for a number of executive agencies under the Trump administration. I saw that and I was like, hey, I know that guy. He ruled in my he ruled in my FOIA in my favor in my FOIA case. So as the result, over the course of the years where I was waiting for these documents or actively fighting for these documents, I got really interested in the FOIA generally. I wrote a bunch about it. Um, and yeah, that kind of paved the way for this essay I published in Sunshine Week.
And Phil, I'm going to have you back on to talk more about the request and the book and that, the
Yeah.
details of that journey. But so th this puts you then in the FOIA Authors Club, which you wrote about in this essay. At what point did you realize you were in the FOIA Authors Club? Is this a real club that exists, or when did you start tracking that?
It is not a real club. I mean, I kind
I
of
mean,
coined
it
it.
is a real club. You are
Well,
part of it.
I'm declaring it a real
Yeah.
club. I think I coined that term unless somebody else has used it. Because look, FOIA delays give you nothing if not time and interest. And because I was naive and inexperienced and didn't really know about all the elements of the FOIA process, I was dealing with a lot of emotions during this time. This big project I was working on was on ice for reasons I didn't understand and or agree with. I was angry, I was confused, I was disillusioned, and I did what journalists do, which is start digging around, and I learned that in fact, a lot of other authors have used the FOIA with varying levels of success in their publishing pursuits. In fact, at one point, and I talk about this anecdote in the article, in 1981, when the Reagan administration tried to roll out some so-called reforms that would really narrow and weaken the FOIA, among the people who spoke out was the Association of American Publishers, which went to Federal Hill and testified to say, don't do this to the FOIA. And they named 14 recent or forthcoming books that had used the FOIA. They pointed to books that had become bestsellers that had used the FOIA. And sure, this was a self-interested endeavor, right? They were looking out for their constituency. Um, but it was a fascinating example of the publishing industry going to bat for FOIA, and ultimately those laws didn't pass. So that was one thing I found, and I also just, I'm kind of an obsessive, probably like you all, and when I got interested in the subject of what other books have used FOIA, I went on like an exhaustive search, or not exhaustive because I don't claim to have identified every single book that uses the FOIA, but I found a lot of them. And in the article, I give readers a brief rundown, and I can do some show and tell here because I own many of these books. So some FOIA-based books are based off of single FBI files, like this wonderful book, John Wiener's Give Me Some Truth, which tells the story of his epic battle for John Lennon's FBI file. Other books that are based on just one FBI file include books for Malcolm X's FBI file, Martin Luther King. There's a book for Frank Sinatra's FBI file. That's kind of a mini genre. Um, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Muckrock's excellent series of anthologies. They're under surveillance series of anthologies of FOIA produced FBI files. This one's for writers. They also have them for activists and scientists. There's a quirky book called The File by a guy named Penn Kimball from the early 1980s, who was really alarmed when he requested his own file to find that he had a file in the government's possession and that it was really inaccurate. So he kind of set out to write an autobiography, which is kind of a middle finger to all of the false, inaccurate, and seemingly incriminating information he found in his own file. So yeah, in the piece, I go through kind of a rundown of these books and offer some juicy quotes that I found along the way.
And do these authors talk much about their use of FOIA, or are the details from the public records just so blended into the book that you don't notice?
Well, so in some cases, authors talk about the process in the book itself. Maybe my favorite example was this guy, Donald Neff, who wrote a book in 1981 called Warriors at Suez, Eisenhower Takes America into the Middle East. And like you flip open the book, and on page like 3 or 4, he's settling some FOIA grudges in his book's acknowledgments. He writes, "The Freedom of Information Act has received glowing compliments in recent years, but if my experience is any guide, the act has now fallen to the inroads of the censors and indifferent bureaucrats." And he goes on to call out the CIA and State Department by name. So that's one example of um, the ways authors talk about it. In other instances, authors wrote pieces outside of their book that talked about the process, or were interviewed around the time of their book. In 1978, a British journalist named William Shawcross wrote a book called Sideshow: Kissinger, Nixon, and the Destruction of Cambodia. And he told the New York Times it would be impossible to write this kind of book in England because England at the time didn't have a FOIA law. It's since passed one. And he wrote in the book, "The Freedom of Information Act is a tribute to the self-confidence of American society. It recognizes rights of citizens that are hardly to be conceived anywhere else in the world." So authors sometimes sing the praises of FOIA, at other times they curse the FOIA. And for me, as somebody who's had both success and my fair share of bumps and bruises with the law, I just really gobbled this stuff up and tried to cram as much as I'd learned into this essay.
Well, before we get to the other part of your work, which is court records or the type of work that you're
Yeah.
describing and talk with Michelle or Michelle presents to us on court records, as the now acting president of the FOIA Authors Club, is there any last words you want to leave us with?
Well, I don't know if I can claim to be the president. I'm honored by that. Some last words would be, well, one, I would say the message I end my essay with is that even though I learned about a lot of these books too late to spare me a lot of the anger and the loneliness and the confusion of my FOIA experience, I did eventually learn about them, and it brought me some comfort. It didn't speed up my FOIA process, which lasted years. It didn't it wasn't a substitute for litigation, which I ultimately needed, but it was heartening to learn that there were other authors alongside me who had gone through similar experiences. And I published this piece in part as a kind of message to folks out there who may be similar roads, uh, and just to let them know that there's actually a fairly rich tradition of literature, not just news articles, which we all know and love, but actual books that have used this law, this amazing and also deeply flawed law, to write some remarkable books. And I'm honored that I can now add my book to that canon of FOIA produced literature.
Well, speaking of which, we will be talking about that in a future FOIA Friday. So if anyone wants to learn more about the work that you've done for that book, keep an eye out. I think Phil will be joining us again in May or so, or
Oh, yeah,
something
no,
else.
yes. I was
Yeah.
just going to add one more thing, Dylan, which
Yeah,
is an open call for anyone who reads the article and knows of a FOIA-fueled book that I left out. I am perennially adding to my list. So please let me know if I've left anything out because I don't claim it's a exhaustive list. That's my last point.
great. Um, Paulina, I saw that a question just came in from you, but I think we may get to that question or something near that question in Michelle's presentation. So without any further ado, I want to pass it on over to Michelle.
Hey everyone, thanks. Phil, I just ordered your book. Um, hadn't heard of it. I'm from a little town called Marietta, Ohio, which is an hour and a half or 2.5 hours away from Portsmouth. Um, and I grew up there in the 90s. And when I went to college, I was surprised that my friends from other places that I met didn't know a bunch of heroin addicts like I did in high school.
Wow.
So it was an interesting experience to be like, because one of the things that when I got to college, I was like, I don't date junkies. Like I don't date people who are addicted to heroin and people are like, "You're 18. What are you talking about?" It's like
Wow.
they're everywhere. And so it's interesting reading about all of that now. So I definitely got your book.
Well, thank you
Um,
for ordering the book and for your interest. And if you have any questions, let's talk after you've read it.
awesome. Thank you. Okay, yes, we will be getting to this transcript situation. Um, Let's see. Share my screen. I know a lot of times on FOIA Fridays, people just sort of chat and talk, but I'm not good in that format because I would ramble and nothing would get done. So let me share.
And you also have an awesome presentation that I can say I've seen and will be really helpful to everyone here.
Okay. Is it working? I'm just seeing black. Are you
Yeah,
guys
you
seeing this?
yeah, you started screen sharing, but it is not showing anything yet. There we go.
Okay. Oh, I went away, didn't it?
I can still see it.
Can you?
Yeah, Phil can see it as well.
Okay. Are we all full screen? Yay. Okay. So everyone, my task that I talked to Dylan about was to do sort of a primer on local and state records, not federal. I do talk about that a little bit. So this is a really, I'm going to say foundation because it's hard to go. Everybody's from different states. One of the things I did in between my PI journalism sort of stuff was I ended up being a research producer on an A&E produced show called Witness to Murder: Digital Evidence. It is now on Hulu. I did it for a season and I ended up having to request all these court records from multiple different states, a lot of states, because you would request everything to see if you wanted to pitch a case as an episode. And so I sort of got into a pattern of how I would go to these states, look up their, Google things and just figure out the easiest way to get to the clerks and stuff like that. So this is sort of useful for I'm going to be in this state. What do I need to do? And sort of knowing the systems behind everything. So always remember some record basics, your custodian of record. Um, that is not, it's not just a job. It's not just a job description. It's not just that sort of corporate speak, like ping me so we can circle back. It's usually a job description that they will actually Google or they'll actually look in their system, like who is our custodian of record? Remember your retention schedules, your fee schedules. Both fee schedules and retention schedules can be requested or they may be online. I gave you guys an example of the Texas fee schedule, which is governed by our administrative code, I think. There is some in open records, but the admin code has a list of like, they can only charge you $1 for a CD or something like that. This is for you guys to just sort of take with you and tuck away. I wanted you to keep in mind how everyone comes into contact with courts, especially if you're looking for someone. It's not just the defendant or the complainant. Think of jurors, witnesses, all those sort of things. And here in criminal, I just listed a bunch of stuff. Civil litigation. I always want you to remember specialty courts. They're super interesting. And in terms of civil, I do civil work as well as criminal defense. And civil does have a whole other set of rules. So while all of these things come under civil, they all have sort of different legal rules that are followed that could make a difference in where you find your records. Okay, so remember your certain terms. Your complainant is somebody who makes a complaint. The petitioner, that's the person who files a petition. So if name changes, you're petitioning for a name change. Your plaintiff is somebody who files a lawsuit. Defendant, you have those in both civil and criminal cases. Complainant and plaintiff can be used interchangeably sometimes. I typically see complainant in criminal and plaintiff in civil. Okay, each system, this is where we get into sort of like how do you make this broad for everyone? each state has a sort of own organization and names of the courts. So we have district court and county court and justice of the peace here in Texas, but I named some others like parish, chancery. You have criminal civil appeals, your specialty courts. I happen to use, I picked Montana because I'm going to talk about getting records from rural areas and why it's so difficult. And it just so happened when I picked Montana, they have a water court. And I went down a rabbit hole with their water court. It was really interesting. It was like Yellowstone, in like court records. It was like what all the ranchers were doing, what they're all fighting about. I found it really fascinating. If you want to look at your state court or which like your state or other states, the National Center for State Courts is a really good research. And then the Court Statistics Project, I'm going to show you a comparison on the next slide. When you get to that and you click on court structure, you can see what the state court looks like. And so here we have, I'm going to move you guys over here. So here we have Montana versus Texas. And I wanted to use Texas specifically, not just because I live here and I know it, but because Texas is, if you see it, it's kind of I mean, it's a little messy. You know, you have all these things going to different places. And if you look, you have two higher courts. Montana's a lot more simple, but as you can see, they have that water court over there. I don't know if anyone's on this call from Montana, but if you ever do stories from water courts, send them my way. So once you get sort of a look at this and you know sort of where your documents might live, like what type of court structure you have, it makes it easier when you're trying to narrow down time to make sure your request is getting to the right place. Because like I said, especially in, I mean, criminal defense, I'm only dealing with Texas, but as a PI, we do not have, I honestly had a bigger budget as a reporter. So you know, especially if you're a freelancer and time is money, this knowing where to find this information is helpful. Appeals courts, just a few things to know about appeals courts. They don't hear new cases, of course. They are supposed to make sure the law is applied fairly. Most people say that doesn't happen. A lot of people, if you are on the criminal justice reform side of things and the activist side of things, they consider appeals courts a rubber stamp. They can remand cases back down to lower levels. Appeals can be civil or criminal. So don't forget your civil side on appeals. A lot of people forget about that. And here's our Texas, our special Texas one. Most states have one highest court. So it all funnels into a Supreme Court. Texas and Oklahoma, we have two separate high courts. In Texas, we have our Supreme Court, and that is for civil. And we have our Court of Criminal Appeals, which is for criminal. This can make a difference if you're investigating a cop, for example. So I love appeals courts for just throwing cops' names into their search function because they might be named in something that isn't related to them, but they were at a scene. And so they're named there. And so it's with any of that sort of appeal stuff, appeals always give good summaries as well. I forgot to put that on. So if you're looking for a nice summary of a case and it did go to appeal, they generally have good summaries. And but for something like this, let's say somebody had a civil rights case against a cop, and then they had their criminal case. You would have to look at both appeals court systems as you work your way up to make sure you are getting all the records in the case. Rural and judicial districts. Okay, so I'm from a rural area, as stated. And when I first moved to Texas, I worked at a tiny little newspaper called Castroville News Bulletin, and we covered like 5 counties. One of the things to know about rural areas, I always hear a lot about cities, and especially like city police departments and how difficult it is to get records. Here in Texas, I have an easier time, I would say with the exception of Austin PD, maybe they're difficult. Houston PD is a little difficult. I've had way more trouble in my rural areas because in cities, usually there's somebody you can sort of go around, and in rural areas, there's not. If somebody doesn't want to give you your documents, and that's just the way they feel. There's really no person. There's that's it. Um, One of the things that is also really important to remember for rural areas is because of the population and the way it's spread out, each state usually creates judicial districts to handle their rural areas. So you'll have one district attorney's office that covers multiple counties. And that can make a difference in where you get your records, but also if you're going to go to court to either watch a trial or try and find someone, if you're looking for a court reporter that you need to talk to. Usually the judicial districts have a rotating schedule of when court happens during the week. So it's like we'll be in this county this week, this county the next, stuff, or they work it out, and that's usually on their website. If it isn't on a website, then you need to call the DA's office and say, "Hey, what is your judicial district schedule? How does it work? Where can I get the information?" Um, and so this is all of Montana's judicial districts. And then here, I wanted to mention Texas has our rural judicial districts. This is the border along Mexico. And then we also have something called a border prosecution unit. The, the Texas border is one of the most policed areas in the country. They're just layered upon layers upon layers. And now we have, of course, the guard here as well. If you see, so way down at the bottom, when you see the yellow part of the border prosecution unit, that overlaps with these judicial districts. I don't know if that makes a difference in documents and where they are held. I know it could. So just know that, like, for example, if you're covering immigration and there's a record somewhere out there, but you're not finding it at your courthouse that it should be in, make sure there aren't any special districts overlapping because they could hold the record somewhere else. I I don't know why they would, but they could. And that could be an issue with finding your records. Okay, so I wanted to mention one of the things that I'm going to mention later is, where you actually get your records. And one of those, of course, is having to call, especially again in the rural areas where you have to call and be like, oh, can you please send me A, B, C, or D? So it's really important to know what the documents are and what you're going to request when you call if you need to do so, but even just to save time and money at the courthouse. So you want to look at the docket to see the summary of the case. And then the one thing you will always want from a civil case to begin is called the original petition or just the petition. And that's the story of your civil case. That is, so and so was driving and then person two hit them and left, and they were left bleeding and bloody, and now I want all the insurance companies to pay. So, and then you also want to see any amended petitions and any TROs and injunctions, and then final orders and judgments. So when you look at the docket of a civil case, you will see a whole bunch of stuff. You'll especially see motions to depose. If you need those to see who is in the deposition or who they're deposing, that could be a possibility. But if you're just starting out, or you need sort of like an overview of the case, especially if you're calling a court clerk to be like, oh my God, can you please just send me something, ask for the petition, and that sort of will help it get through. And then you can see from there, or at the very least, the docket summary, so you can see what else you might need. And then for criminal, I went ahead and put a little screenshot of a docket summary. Of course, we have this little mess right here. So you always want the indictment or the warrant, the charging instrument, which is like a term that they use. This is the docket. I use bond records a lot to find possible interview subjects, and those people are the actual bondsmen. There are a lot of rules about bondsmen. They can't give out information in terms of like, I needed to find my defendant recently. I didn't have a good phone number. I went to her bondsman and he went through all 6 of my numbers and said, no, none of these are right. But he couldn't give me her number, and she was my client. But They can be really, really chatty. And I've gotten, obviously off the record, I've gotten a whole bunch of information from bondsmen. So, and now I work with a lot of them because I work with security companies. So don't forget them. And they are often on, the magistrate records in within the court documents. You'll see the bond information in the bond packet, and I'll have who their bondsman is. Here in Texas, we have what's called a pen packet. They have these in all states. I don't know if they're called pen packets in all states. They are a transfer packet. When your person who's been found guilty is transferred from their county jail to their state jail, usually there is a court record of that that includes the packet of, it has a nice summary of the case. It has all the important bond information. It usually has the indictment. It sort of whittles down all the important documents. I always like trying to get those or find those. I highly recommend finding out what it's called in your state so you can know how to easily locate that in the court records. Transcripts. Okay, they're not automatically created. Please keep that in mind. Transcripts are created by an interested party in the case. Usually that means appeals. I've gone to look for transcripts in cases, particularly gang cases from the 90s in San Antonio, where no one had an appeal, so there was no transcript. I could pay for it, but I'm not going to do that. That is the biggest con about transcripts. They can be very expensive, as Phil mentioned, and his article mentioned, which was so interesting. And then his article linked to another article, which I just read before this started. It was also very interesting. To the question about being with court reporters and stenographers, because of the digitization of records, I don't know if they still do that as often. That comes interestingly from lobbying, especially here in Texas. Let me just say here in Texas, and then you guys can extrapolate if it's the same in another state. Here in Texas, the court reporters have a big lobbyist group, and they lobby to make sure they are in charge of all these documents. And one of the reason is because it helps keep their jobs. So that is one reason. And I have had to track down old transcripts, a court reporter in their attic in New York. And I'm like, this is a terrible system. This system makes no sense. And so I'm not sure in other states, and I had a conversation with somebody who worked at the Bar Association. And I was like, can you explain? And they were the ones explaining this to me. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. You're just trusting this one random person to carry these boxes of transcripts all over the country as they move. That's terrible. And he said that's lobbying. It protects their jobs, and also a lot of those old ones, where were they going to put them? And I said, oh, at the courthouse where they put the other records. And then so we went back and forth about that. I don't know if that's still happening. I think court reporters are in their lobbying groups are going to be fighting more and more because AI is going to take their jobs. And so we're going to see, as AI takes over in the legal field, we're going to see a lot of that change. And we're going to see a really interesting, I think, more public battle. I think court reporters really get to sort of they're hidden in a way. No one realizes they have lobbying groups. They're not like big court reporters. Nobody's thinking of them as that way. But they have power because they're such a specialized job. And that to me is one of the biggest cons of how that system is set up. But I hope that's changing. I haven't had to get transcripts in a while, so I do hope that's changing because everything is digitized. The pros, of course, they're an absolute wealth of information. You have your testimony, you can use direct quotes, voir dire, you can track down your jury members and see what they were thinking. And one of the things, for my book that I'm working on the San Antonio Four, the attitude of the attorneys in two different trials was really interesting to me and really showed a lot of anti-gay bias in one trial versus another. And you could really see it in the transcripts. So I understand why people would want transcripts. It is just, they can be sometimes difficult to get. Okay, so then we're at once you have all these documents that you want to get, where do you find them? So we talked about custodian of record. Usually, your custodian of record is your county clerk, your district clerk, your justices of the peace, your appeals court clerks. I did put some databases in here like julyrecords.com and then, sort of your other databases, Nexus, Pacer, that sort of stuff. Of course, Pacer is federal. And then for the states, I've listed, I got this from Muckrock, for the states that have residency laws, um, you just hire someone. What we did at A&E was we found a paralegal on Upwork, I think, and um, I had everything written out, and I found the specific district clerk it needed to go to, and the custodian of record at that district clerk's office. We hired the person in Alabama, and we just sent her everything so she could put it in, and then she sent it back. It's a hassle, but those residency laws, you know, they're a pain in the ass, basically, but easy to get around if you can hire somebody for $20. Of course, PIs, we have all our different associations, so we just mail, we send out notices. Can somebody retrieve these documents? I do stuff like that. I retrieve documents for people. So it is easy to find people usually who will do that for you. And then my favorite thing of all the things, and some people really don't like portals, and I don't understand why people don't like portals. I love portals. I have accounts at so many different portals. This one is for Harris County, which is where Houston is located in Texas. And I just, I brought this out because what you're going to want to do, of course, is just Google your district clerk for whatever county the court is in, like whatever, say, for example, I know this person lived in Houston, they were arrested in Houston, and the trial was in Houston. Well, you look up, it's like, okay, well, they have state district courts. So you Google your district court, Houston, Texas. It's going to come up in Harris County. You go to their portal and look at everything they offer. They do civil, they do criminal, they do background checks. Now, I will say that this one is very robust compared to others. Right now, we're having a problem in Bexar County, which is where San Antonio is located, because they just went to a new system and they took out the date of birth search function. And the other day, I had to look up someone who had what was essentially the Spanish version of Joe Smith. And there were 16 pages of him. And there was no way you had to click on each one to see a DOB. So I'm going to try and figure that out with the district clerk to be like, look, you used to have this, you don't. That's becoming a huge problem right now with getting court records is once you get to the place, once you get to the district clerk and you know what you need, the elimination of PII is a big problem. Taking out dates of birth, only using initials, and the clean slate laws, which I do back. I like my clean slate laws, but they are difficult when it comes to getting records and that's where your retention schedule comes in, trying to keep up what states have to keep in courts under clean slate laws. One of the other reasons it's so nice to use portals. We have all been as reporters, we've all been in the spot where they lie and say, oh, I didn't get that email, or I didn't do this. If it's in a portal, you get a number, you can say, this is your portal. If you're not seeing it, then it's a you problem, not a me problem. Because they like blaming other people when they don't get their records in. Here in Texas, it's a 10-day, they have 10 days. If they don't get back to you in those 10 days to say they're filing with the AG, then it's automatic. They have to give it to you. And so that's where that comes in a lot. Oh, well, we didn't see your email. So now that they have portals, I'm a big fan. One of the things I want to talk about is cross-pollination of courts. So it's when civil and criminal and state and federal courts meet. Gang injunctions are a big one. If you're doing historical gang research, check those out. They are a response to criminal acts. Red gun laws and domestic violence restraining orders, those are civil in response to criminal. Civil rights cases can, of course, influence criminal cases down the line. Gun cases. This was a big thing when gangs really started to increase in the 90s and then early 2000s. If you had a sawed-off shotgun and they couldn't get you, you only had a minimal amount of drugs, they would take that charge and they would bump it up to federal. And so what you would see in your court document, it would just sort of stop. It wouldn't go anywhere. And it wouldn't even necessarily say dismissed. It would just be like, what happened? And so it was like, oh, it's at the federal court now. And bankruptcy. Oops, that's hold. It should be hold. Sorry, that should say bankruptcy can put a hold on state cases. Bankruptcy, of course, is filed in federal court. So you look at that in PACER, but it has a provision. The bankruptcy law has a provision that's called automatic stay. And that goes against certain creditors pursuing money. It can't stop divorce or child custody, criminal, or all evictions. Evictions are sort of fuzzy in there. But very importantly, it can stop personal injury, repossessions, and a classification of evictions. So, I do due diligence sometimes. If you see a bankruptcy in federal court, and I know about this case because I'm personally involved. And this guy, if you looked him up, he would be all over the news. He was everywhere. But let's say your person isn't all over the news. I went ahead and looked up his bankruptcy. And when you go through the filings in PACER, this is one of the questions they have to answer, which is there any trial that, what does it say? Oh yeah, any types of debt or anything that's going to be affected by this. They put down this case number in Kendall County. So you go to Kendall County, you look in the district court, and you look at the case number, and he has all of these cases. Texas has a statewide search, so and you can see the case number. Now, what I was hoping was that I go to that case number and I look in the events of the case, and it shows what's called Rule 11 agreement or notice of bankruptcy. And what those do, those are filed in your state court case to show we're shutting this down because this person, or it's on hold because this person filed for bankruptcy in federal court. That didn't happen on my case. I also, and it's because I'm not sure why it didn't happen in my case. I know personally it happened because I was on the call when they said this isn't going anywhere because he is filing for bankruptcy. And then I also wanted to show you this. His case is also a nice criminal versus civil cross-pollination because if you go to, it didn't work on this case because it's confidential, but if you go to his other case, you can find that a couple people are suing him and CS's original petition because he was illegally placing video cameras in his Airbnb. So one of the things when we talk about civil and criminal and that sort of thing, if you didn't know anything about this guy and you only started with the bankruptcy, then you come down to all these state lawsuits. You see here it says illegally place video cameras on the property. There's likely a criminal case somewhere. So if you went to your Kendall County District Court for criminal filing, you would find that case because it exists. He did a year. And yes, he had cameras facing a shower and a bedroom. And when he filed for bankruptcy, I of course immediately looked up all of his properties, and no, he hasn't sold his $2.1 million estate in Houston, and no, he hasn't sold his, $2 million ranch in the Hill Country, but he filed. And so all of those things, those are all different places to get your court records, the criminal filings, the civil, and then the federal. He ended up on CNN, not him personally, but some of the people he filmed. Don't forget misdemeanors. This is my own speeding ticket. Okay, so I totally forgot that I had a speeding ticket. And I tend to look up when I got married because I always forget. And Bexar County what Bexar County did was when they moved to this new system, civil and criminal all show up together. And so I saw my marriage stuff and then I saw a speeding ticket and I was like, what is this? And it's 10 years old. And I was at the courthouse and I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to see if I can find it. And this is one of the things that helps to know how the system is set up, because when I was down in the records section, they said, oh, if it's speeding, it's going to be municipal court. And then they said, I don't even know why I showed up in county court. And I said, because it was a justice of the peace, it was a constable. Or no, he was a deputy. He was county. And they're like, oh, okay. So then they sent me to the right place. I went and I requested my speeding ticket. They still had it. There's a ton of information on here, also a picture. What I did next was try and request this as an open record, because the stuff that's blanked out, I blanked that out myself. They said it was past the retention schedule and they didn't have the document anymore. But clearly they did, because I got it. But they are correct. It was beyond the retention schedule. No one's requesting 10-year-old speeding tickets. But it has so much information. And this is only one part. So especially if you're trying to look for somebody or you're setting up a timeline, I don't know if the photo would be public. That's why I requested it as an open record, because I wanted to see if they would send it with a photo. I think they would. I'm not sure. So that's another thing. Now, now that everything is an e-ticket and everything, and then keep in mind, depending on what happened, and this would help you go back and get body cam footage. So let's say your city council member got a speeding ticket and you want to see if they were an asshole. You get the speeding ticket. It makes it a lot easier to get the body cam footage because you can really narrow down the time. Okay, so here's a quick example of using lower courts to find trend or do follow stories. If you want to look at this story, we have a big problem here in San Antonio with stray dogs biting people, and there was a elderly couple killed by some stray dogs here not too long ago. This was in the story. At least 2 dogs had been involved in a pair of confirmed bite cases. And bite cases are municipal courts. And here in San Antonio, I wanted to point this out. So you could go to, for example, search cases and look up those people. But you know how anytime something happens and then editors are like, oh, we have to do this whole second day thing, right? So in most of these municipal districts and appeals all the way up, they will show their dockets and their upcoming dockets. So for this, I just looked at view dockets. And then as you scroll down, there's this little thingy called animal appearance. And so I clicked on view cases and I got to these folks, Amy and Eddie Dacey. They took up so much of the docket that day. Most of these cases are different. They had so many. I don't know what's going on in the Dacey household with their dangerous animals, but that could be a story. And so that's, a lot of people, they always think of federal cases. They think of FOIA. They think of murders and stuff. But some of these lower courts can be really interesting. And because people forget about them, they forget what their own information is out there, including, like me and my speeding ticket. And then last but not least, I want to tell you the difference between court records and judicial records. Court records are everything we've been talking about. They're the motions, the pleadings, the orders, the rulings. It's everything that has to do in connection with a case. They are usually subject to open records. Judicial records, that's the administration part, the administrative part. So I also do political opposition research. So I had to look into a judge. I was getting all of his complaints, his ethics opinions on him, the investigations that were involved in that, correspondence, calendars. Part of the thing with judicial records is they can be governed by administrative law under the state, not necessarily open records. So you'll say, under Chapter 552, which is Texas, we're under the state's open record law, and what they'll come back with is, we're not subject to that. And then they just shut you down. So make sure you know what governs your judicial records and where they sort of sit in the law, because that can help you make sure you get what you are owed by the state. Here's some little tips. I still use Google. I mean, I do love, for research purposes, AI, even though it's destroying the earth and is going to take over and matrix us all. One of the things about these court records is, especially things that are uploaded to appeals websites, is if you do a file type PDF search with the person's name, that can help you get it can help you find some things that they may have forgotten are available. The other thing though is now that newspapers and TV stations and everybody's uploading things via, Scribd, for example, and these other sort of PDF platforms, that can help you find them that way. Um, don't forget to conduct your name search in every single level of the court. Call your people, schedule some meetings. It's really great to get to know people if you have the time. I know everyone's super busy. I covered executions here in Texas, and the newspaper wouldn't pay for me to spend the night. So what would happen is I would have to go the day of when it was a 5-hour drive, and the US Supreme Court would be making decisions during that drive. So one day I just had like this panic attack to the Supreme Court clerk. He was so nice after that. And I would chat with him prior to the execution, be like, look, I'm going to be on the road. Can you just email me? And he would. And that was really cool of him. And I'm not saying they'll still do that. It's a different environment nowadays, but your clerks can be really, 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 really helpful. And when you call, have your list of documents to save them time, appellate courts for summaries. A lot of I'm starting a Start Me page. I don't know how that's going to go. I'm kind of lazy about it. A lot of my stuff is bookmarked, but I have a friend who's a PI, and she puts all of her links in Excel to keep track of them. And then ChatGPT, Deep Research AI, and figuring out court and open record documents in different states can be really helpful, especially if your prompt is, I want to become an expert in open records in this state. Tell me every single law that intersects with open records in name the state. I think that's it. Yes. Okay. How did I do? What time is it? Did I do okay?
You did incredible. It is 1:58.
Ah!
It was a great presentation and perfect timing. Um, I would like to open up the floor to questions. I think we can both hang around for a little bit. Michelle, do you have a couple minutes if people have?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and drop it in the chat. I will selfishly start out with my first question that I've been wondering, which is how do you think about the difference of what you can get through portals online versus going in person? Or is there even a difference?
That's such a good question. There's a huge difference. Right now, and so in Harris County, one of the reasons I like it is you can set up your account and then you can just buy everything. And you look under images in Harris County, which that's it. Sometimes you'll see if you don't see what you want, always look and see if there's an image because that's where it's located. So Harris County, it's great. I was investigating a cop for a capital murder case, and all of his divorce records were there, and I could get them all. Texas still has divorce records open, which is nice. I think that's oops, my phone fell. I think that's going to change, pretty soon. Here in Bexar County, we can't get anything. The portal is mainly for requesting. So, for example, if their district clerks have a portal, so you request through the portal. Others, so there's a difference between a portal where you can make all of your requests versus just the district clerk site that shows you all the information. So for Harris County, it's so nice because they sort of combined all that. You just go to their website, you create, and then you just order. You don't have to make a request. Now, if I wanted to request certain things, I could. I've requested a lot of archival. I requested some autopsies from 1974 and it was all in a district clerk file. And I requested those and they were really helpful. And that was through an open records. But a lot of the district clerk websites, they will make you come in and get something. So you can see what's there and you can say, okay, I'm going to need this, this, and this. And then you have to go in and get it. Or if you only need that one thing, just try the clerk and be like, hey, can you just send me this one thing? I went in to Bexar County. I had a list of like 12 things I needed to get, and the girl wrote down my email wrong. And the next day I had nothing. I was like, oh, I don't want to go back in and do all this stuff. And the clerk who was there was like, "Oh, I'll just get her to fix the email," and they took care of it, so I didn't have to come back in. So that's sort of the difference between some are set up to where you see everything, then you do a request at a different spot. Some of them still make you email, which I'm not a fan of. I'm just really, I mean, it's better than, taking a piece of paper in, but it's just so easy for them to lie about emails. It's
Mm.
so easy. Um, so yeah, did that explain it, the difference between the portal and the,
Yeah, totally. That's super helpful. Does anyone else have any questions to round us out? There may be no questions, which makes sense because you were so rigorous in your presenting. Um, Anything else you want to leave this group with?
I think that's all. I think, oops, there you are. I just hit a button. I think it's really important. It's hard if you're doing national work and you can't meet anyone if you're just sort of dropping in like I was doing for A&E, just like pulling things. But I just really recommend if you cover one area and you do it a lot, try to go meet your people or at least have a phone conversation. Go to the courthouse, sit around, go to the civil courthouse, um, and just figure out its flow. Regularly go to where you need to request a document, what system they use, what computer they use, play around online, because I mean, I'll do stuff to practice where and I do stuff for these talks I give where I will just find a story online and then go look for the stuff. Then because I know it's there, for example. And that's a way to see how your system works. Oh, the other thing is I should have mentioned this. Some district clerks, usually not at a lower level, but just at that district clerk level, and county clerks sometimes, um, they have instructions. So they'll have a PDF instruction on how to search for cases. And ours actually had a 2 hour free webinar session where
Oh,
they took us through every single little step and then we could ask questions. And I thought that was really cool of them. They don't have to do that, but they did. And then that video lives somewhere on their site. It did for a while. So definitely check out your resources at your courthouse because as they move to different systems, sometimes they have like the PDFs up and stuff like that for searching and looking and filing and all that.
great. Well, speaking of meet your people, I'm so grateful that you came on and hung out with us today. You are often on these calls,
I am.
even when you're
I
not
love FOIA
presenting.
Friday.
If anyone has a question, I'm sure Michelle will be around in future FOIA Fridays.
Yes.
And I am currently trying to get Michelle to come back on and talk about her book as that continues on. So,
It isn't sold yet. Isn't sold yet.
yeah. But yeah, thank you so
Thank
much
you
again
so
for joining
much.
us. Phil, thanks for coming on as well.
Thank you for having me.
And I will see y'all next month for another FOIA Friday.